In 2008, I moved to Hyderabad in South India to work with low-cost private schools. I've been a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras and spent most of my 20s in Central America, so I thought, India, piece of cake. I'd seen Monsoon Wedding, I loved it, and I thought, I'm ready to have a billion neighbors. I wasn't. First thing, in India, they do not speak my English. They speak Indian English, which means there's a different accent, there is different vocabulary, and the nonverbal communication can sometimes be really confusing. And also, each state in India tends to have its own language. So I was working in Hyderabad in the state of Andhra Pradesh, and their state language is Telugu. I was also working in the old city in Hyderabad, which is mostly Muslim, and they speak Urdu. So the entire time that I was in Hyderabad, I never knew whether to learn Hindi, Urdu, or Telugu, so I just stuck with deciphering Indian English. The second thing about India the second thing that I learned when I got to India is that Hyderabad is a predominantly Muslim city. So when I first headed out to visit schools, I went out to meet with parents. And when I got there, there were about 100 mothers waiting to meet with me. And there they were in their black burqas with just their eyes peeking out. And in Telugu and Urdu, they wanted to tell me about all of their expectations for their child's education. So with no cultural references and with no language references, I really had no idea what was going on around me at all times. I also was the first person from my organization to land in Hyderabad, and so I was really on my own. So every day I'd have to get from my home to my office, and then I'd have to head out to the schools, and it was daunting. And you can actually imagine it. It's like those dirt streets that are tangled, and they start wide and they get narrower, and you have no idea where they start and where they're gonna end. And then there's just endless billboards with lots of different letters on them in foreign languages. I had no idea what they were saying. And then there's just canopies of wires nested over streets. Who knew what they were doing up there? And then just swarms of people going in and out of these different gullies and streets. Who knew where in the world I was and what I was doing there? I certainly didn't know what I was doing there and where I was going. And it was one of those moments that I never really felt so alone in my life. I never actually ever felt so alive in my life either. And I never just really felt so far, far, far away from home. What I did know from my time in Honduras is that if you're starting a new venture in a foreign land, you need an awesome driver. So when I landed in Hyderabad, I was like, I'm gonna find my driver, I'm gonna find my man, and he's gonna be a rickshaw driver. And I don't know if you guys know rickshaws, but they're basically like scooters with 3 wheels. There's a carriage, there's a top, and they're open on the side. So you're totally exposed to all the traffic and pollution and street life that India has to offer. So you always have a little bit of wind in your hair, you always have noise in your ears, and always a little bit of dust up your nose. And I thought, this is it. This is how I'm rolling across India. I'm gonna find my rickshaw driver. And so I headed out trying to find my man in my neighborhood, all the different rickshaws trolling around. And to be honest, it wasn't too different than my dating life. I would think, this is it. I found my guy. And he'd inevitably let me down. He would stop answering my phone calls, wouldn't pick up my text messages. If he showed up, he would ask for more money, or he would be drunk. No rickshaw driver, none of these men could meet my expectations. That's when I met Kieran. And let's be clear, Kieran was not a romantic love. He was so much deeper than that. It's not a family love because we don't share the same bloodlines. We don't even have the same spiritual beliefs. It's not an intimate love because we never spoke that much. It was always just, hello, madam. Hi, Kieran. Chalo, let's go. And that was it. And it wasn't an immediate love. It was really a love that was earned by both of us. When I first met Kieran, he was about 20 years old, and he was starting to take over his dad's taxi business. So he was not a cool rickshaw driver with a sexy rickshaw. He was just a normal car, and I was his first client. And I met him because his father had driven me out to a school one day. And I think what really bonded Kieran and I was that we were both at this moment in our lives where we were heading out on this brand new adventure and these big major career shifts for us. I think what I had not anticipated is that I would become Kieran's madam, Molly madam. I did not trust Kieran immediately. The first couple times that we went out to schools, he informed me there was an extra charge for air conditioning, and I thought that was bullshit. He was treating me just like the rickshaw drivers and quote unquote taking me for a ride. So I was like, no, I'm not paying for air conditioning. It was pretty hot, so I'd jump into the back seat and I'd put like my scarf or my dupatta over my head, and I had my North American water bottle, and I'd sip on it and pretend I was cool while I was just sweating it out on the inside. And this went on for weeks. And then one day I showed up and the air conditioning was just on. Kieran had gotten hot enough and I had won my first battle. After that, the AC was always on and I never got charged extra for that. While these air conditioning wars were going on, I also ended up hiring Kieran to drive me from my home to my office every single day. And that meant we spent a lot of time in the car together, and every morning I'd come downstairs and there was Kieran. Hello, madam. Hi, Kieran. Chalo, let's go. And away we would go. But I think the real turning point in our relationship was right after the terrorist attack on Bombay at the Taj Hotel. News had not yet been received in the United States, and early in the day, there was just this nonstop ringing on the doorbell at my apartment. And I went out and opened the door, and there was Kieran. Madam, please, do not leave your house today. And I think that's when it really hit me. No one else was gonna look out for me in India. No one else really cared about me in India like Kieran did. And he did really take care of me. He told me what days I could go into the old city and what days I couldn't, which days I should cover my head, which school owners he liked and which he did not like. And I think my favorite thing was that Kieran always insisted on waiting in line for me at the bottle shop. So he'd pick out my Kingfisher beer, my teacher's whiskey, my Old Monk rum. Yeah, it was pretty nice. And then whenever I flew, Kieran would pick me up from the airport, and I'd come out of the gates and I'd go down the escalator, and there he'd be chilling in front of McDonald's. I'd grab an ice cream cone, he'd grab my bag, and chalo, let's go. And even Kieran would drive us on the weekends. So friends and I would go out for dinner, we'd go to a dance club, and he'd drop us off, and I'd say, Kieran, go home, get some rest, I'll see you on Monday. And no matter the hour, we'd come tumbling out of these clubs and stumbling into the parking lot, and there Kieran was. He was, texting with his friends on the phone or sleeping in the car, but he was always there making sure that I made it home safe. He once told me, Molly, if anything, or he didn't say Molly, madam, if anything happens to you in Hyderabad, it is my fault. And that's when I knew what it meant to be Molly madam, to be Kieran's madam. I was his responsibility, and actually he was my responsibility. So I started introducing him to my friends. As new folks came in from my organization, I introduced him. Other foreigners started using Kieran. And next thing I knew, his taxi business went from being 1 car to 2 cars to 3 cars. He had 5 drivers, he had an empire. He even invested in this hot red Hyundai that had black polarized windows and this sweet sound system. So really everybody did want to roll with Kieran. And with that growth, I'm super proud of him, but at the same time I began to see him less and less. And then next thing I realized, there was another driver who was driving me around every single day. And then the days that Kieran did come and drive for me, he was late, and that was super annoying. And then one day, he flat out did not show up at all. I was pissed. The honeymoon was over. And I remember that day because it was April in Hyderabad, which is really hot. It's one of those days that when the wind blows, It scorches your skin. So when Kieran showed up to apologize, I already had this lover's-like rage boiling inside of me. Out on the street in Himayatnagar, we got in this huge argument, sun beating down. I grabbed this mob around me, shouting at Kieran, and he remained really quiet. The only thing I heard was, "Yes, madam," as I screamed, "I found you, I can find another driver, we are through." Really not my finest moment. The next day I had to fly to Delhi, and I called just a regular taxi to come pick me up. The gentleman showed up, no small talk, and I got into the back of his cab, and it was icy cold air conditioning that I had not earned and I had not paid for. And it was a rock bottom moment. I was once again a foreigner in a strange land. And on the way back into Hyderabad from Delhi, I really thought, what am I doing here in India? I had no anchors. I was really ashamed of my argument in the street with Kieran. I also was frustrated. I'd let myself down. I felt like India had let me down. And I thought, maybe it's time for me to head home. I've had enough. And as I walked out of the gate, there was Kieran. I had no idea what he was doing there. I looked around. Was he there for another friend? No, he was there for me. He didn't know my flights. I still don't know how he knew I was going to be there. I don't know how long he was there, but he was there and he was waiting for me. And I loved that. I was hello, madam. Hi, Karen. Grabbed my bag and down the escalator we went. And at the bottom, he looked at me. Madam, McDonald's? That's when I knew. Kieran knew me better than myself. He was my home. He was my India. He was like my Hyderabad. When I left India about a year later, Kieran asked if he could drive me to the airport, and it was a really big deal. He brought his mom, who did not speak English, who I'd never met before. He brought his dad. I had to promise to come back for his wedding, and at the airport, that was the first time Kieran and I hugged. And it was one of those airport hugs with tears in your eyes and iconic moments in your life that I'll never forget. And it's been, 5 years since I've left India or stopped traveling there regularly. And I actually cannot talk about India without talking about Kieran. Kieran is now married. His taxi empire is doing awesome, so well that he recently invested in a bottle shop, which I think is his madam. I might have had some influence on. And one of the greatest joys in my life is about once a month, my Facebook Messenger pops up. Hello, madam. Hi, Karen. And I know with that message that all is good, all is right, and all is as it should be in this world. Chalo, let's go.